and exclaiming, "Hannah!" as if he hadn't seen her for months, when it had probably only been a few hours. So Alice had no choice but to bid her plans for the evening goodbye and steel herself to greet Hannah Holmes, her father's new girlfriend. Hannah and James had met at the university, where they both worked in the Department of History. James was a culinary historian, which meant he studied the history of food. Culinary historians could also be called food historians, but James preferred culinary historian for the same reason he liked to call his and Alice's hair ginger instead of orange. It just had a nicer ring to it. Hannah studied the Victorian era, the period from 1837 to 1901, so called because Queen Victoria had ruled over Great Britain back then. She'd explained this to Alice the first time they'd met back in April. And Alice, who just learned that her father had been dating Hannah since February but hadn't bothered to tell Alice, had informed Hannah that she knew what the Victorian era was. Thank you very much. Hannah had been making regular appearances at inopportune times ever since. She bounced through the front door, smiling as usual, and cried, "Alice!" as if seeing her was the most exciting part of her day. Alice forced a smile that she hoped looked genuine, but not too friendly. Hannah Holmes looked nothing like any historian Alice had ever met. Most of her father's colleagues dressed in tweed and corduroy and were usually in need of a haircut. Hannah wore jeans and t-shirts, often paired with matching nail polish, today a candy apple red. She had straight and shiny black hair and bangs that grazed her eyebrows so perfectly, Alice suspected she must trim them every day. It made her even more aware of her own hair, which, like her father's, was utterly untamable. She pulled it into a braid each morning, but by lunchtime, it was all frizz and flyaways. "Hannah's pretty cool," Alice's friend Matt Diaz had recently observed. They'd been sitting on Matt's front step across the street, watching Hannah park her sporty black car outside the Fleck's townhouse. Alice had frowned. "How do you know?" He shrugged. "Cammy said so. She said Hannah's about as cool as an adult can be." Matt's 15-year-old sister Cammy was an authority on such things, so Alice couldn't very well argue. But it didn't change her opinion of her father's new girlfriend. Hannah Holmes was unnecessary. Alice and James had been perfectly happy without her. Still, she thanked Hannah for the phone. That was only polite. "You're very welcome." Hannah gave her a toothy smile. "And I have something else for you." She dug into her tote bag and pulled out a box the color of pistachio ice cream. The name La Durée was printed on the top in gold script. Alice lifted the lid, uncovering a row of dainty sandwich cookies, each a different color of the rainbow. "Macaron!" she gasped, forgetting to hide her excitement. She and her father had once spent a weekend trying to perfect the confections, which were as tricky to make as they were delicious. The cookies were made of almond meringue, sandwiched together with buttercream or ganache. According to James, macarons had been invented by Venetian monks in the 8th century. Back then, they were called priests' belly buttons. She felt like she'd been given a box of rare jewels. "Thank you," she said again, wishing Hannah weren't quite so good with gifts. "We'll have them for dessert," James proclaimed. "What a treat!" Alice nodded, carefully closing the lid. "So, what's for dinner?" "Good question." He ushered them down the hall and into the kitchen, where he picked up a cookbook from the counter. Magnificent Medieval Meals, Volume 12. "I saw a recipe for mutton stew that looked interesting." "Hannah's vegetarian," Alice reminded him. "Yes, of course." He slammed the book shut. "I knew that." "How about pizza?" she suggested. "Excellent idea," he cried. "I have a recipe somewhere for the very first pizza ever made."